So Leela volunteered as a Sustainable Tourism Officer at the Provincial Government in Negros Occidental. There she supported staff and mentored stakeholders in the tourism industry, creating awareness and providing opportunities to implement sustainable ways of showcasing their beautiful area. Leela is now volunteering as a Northern Territory alumni representative for the Australian Volunteers Program. Next to Leela, we have Maddie. Maddie volunteered as an economic policy analyst for the Tongan Ministry of Infrastructure and assisted the ministry with their corporate plan and also a new website. In her spare time in Tonga, Madeleine explored the beautiful country, tried to learn Tongan and made many great friends. She also volunteered for a small community organisation, Pasakala Nokolofa. I did practice that pronunciation, apologies if that was not quite right, at Tonga's only cycling group. Since her assignment, Madeleine has volunteered locally in Darwin, which helped her expand her skills and connected her more closely to her new home. She learnt to sail while volunteering for Rotacat, a local sailing program for young people experiencing social barriers. And last but certainly not least, we have John. So John was a former senior executive with the Department of Finance and spent over 20 years in senior management roles over many diverse program and policy areas. He retired from the public service in 2007 to work as a consultant and dedicate his time to volunteering in Southeast Asia. He has undertaken many specialist volunteer assignments over the past decade. John has always welcomed the opportunity to work with organisations to build their capability and grow and prepare for the future. His particular interest is working with NGOs and social enterprises to plan and operate in a continuously disrupted world. During the COVID period, John has undertaken multiple remote volunteer assignments in Cambodia and Vietnam, and is currently on another remote assignment in Vietnam. So I would now like to pass to Leela to begin the panel discussion. Thanks, Leela.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. Don't know whether I should stand or just sit. Thank you, Miff. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone. It's an honour to be speaking here today and representing Australian Volunteers Program and also as a returned volunteer. 3 things I have to apologise. I'm extremely nervous. I'm from Darwin, so there's a lot of people and very well dressed. I did notes, but I can't read them because, yeah, my writing's shocking. So I'm going to be very professionally skilled at winging it. And I actually registered for another breakout session, so that would have been extremely awkward. So thank you, me, for turning up. Sure. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of these lands that we're meeting on today, the Ngunnawal people, and also online. I know there's different locations. I'm privileged to be living and breathing and working on Larrakia land in Darwin. So, you know, I understand that Ngunnawal peoples, this is their land, and it's just an honour to be here in this capacity. Also to pay my deepest respects to elders past and present, and to extend that respect to people identified as Aboriginal Australian and Torres Strait Islanders that are here today or online. So I will start with questions and we will go through a variety. I'll ask the questions and they will answer. And then we'll before the last question is going to be offered, I will then I'll tell you that, you know, the panel is open to any questions from the audience. So we hope you engage. But I can assure you that Maddie and John are going to really inspire you with their experiences and their stories. And I think I would hope that it would, I guess, get you to consider, I guess, the benefits of global volunteering in the diverse ranges or forms that we do volunteering at an international capacity, and how you can complement that with your amazing local work. So are we ready? Awesome. So I'll start with you, John. Can you please briefly describe your volunteer assignment with the Australian Volunteers Program?
Thanks. here. Even though I've volunteered a lot, I've got out of the habit of talking to a lot of people. You don't tend to talk to a lot when you're out on assignment, particularly in Zoom meetings these days. I'm currently doing a remote assignment through AVI, through the Department of Foreign Affairs volunteer program. I'm in Vietnam with a small group called Hearing and Beyond. This group is in Hoi An in Vietnam. Have you ever been to Hoi An? It's a lovely coastal spot. It's a founder of the centre is a woman from Australia who saw a need in the area for an education centre for young children with hearing impairment, either totally deaf or have difficulties hearing. Vietnam is still one of the countries in Southeast Asia. If you have a disability such as hearing, it's difficult to get into normal schools, etc. eventually, or get any help whatsoever. So May, the founder, has set it up. It's been going probably for a year, 2 years. Asked AVI for some assistance. Like most the smaller organisations and the larger ones internationally, funding is a big issue, as it is here in Australia. Internationally, the big grant funds are tending to dry up a bit. So if you were working for an organisation or an organisation that did have big funding, that's tending to become harder to get and maintain. And so small organisations like Hearing and Beyond are really down the bottom of the pile sometimes when it comes to funding. So the objective of this remote assignment, which initially is only sort of two months, is to just see where they are organisationally, work out what, with May and the other staff members, what their priorities are, and then put in place some strategies, workable strategies that initially will raise some funding for them and enable them to buy more educational type tools and that for the kids. But also make sure that they're looking at their sort of ongoing sustainability too. So, it's the old adage, even though I worked at the Department of Finance for a long time, I was never in the budget group, I've got to say. So, but, if it's not working and you can't make it work, don't keep throwing money at it, and that doesn't mean, that's an immediate decision, but normally when I do go into organisations like that, and the founders want it too, is to give them to look at the funding, make sure they're on the right track. Not necessarily their program stuff, because that's not what I do, but around their organisation or strengthening their organisation. So that project's just started. It's remote. I think we'll probably talk about remote type assignments later on. During COVID, I worked with another organisation in Vietnam called Hope Box. That's run by a Vietnamese woman, a young woman who's 30, I think, who has an amazing background and a passion for development, and she's opened up a centre for mainly women at this stage who have experienced domestic violence. There's a gap in the services she identified for these survivors, and that's when they're going into the employment sort of area. There's big international organisations who can get them out, rescue them, all those things. But when it comes to giving them the confidence to have to go and get a job for the first time, there was a bit of a gap there. The founder has set this up, started it in 2019, just before COVID, you know, managed to get through COVID. It's still there, which is quite interesting. Again, you know, an assignment like this one with Hum and Hopebox was really about, again, strengthening their organisational capability, making sure with them and the organisation working out how you know, they're going to move into the future. You know, what are their risks and what are their opportunities there. Hopebox has also established an offshoot of their organisation in Australia called Hopebox Australia. So that becomes a funding body for the international organisation. So, yeah, so that gives you a taste of probably most of the assignments I've done, you know, is around the strength of the operational side. You know, I'm not a program person, so the organisations I normally work for have program people, either local or other volunteers who come in to do that. So I'm always focused on the organisational side of things. I won't talk about it too much more, but we'll probably cover it later. But of all the assignments I've done over 15 odd years, I started off as having some great expectations and ambitions and whatever the word was about volunteering. It really was brought down to earth fairly quickly after a couple of assignments that I had to source myself. And that's really why I've gravitated into Australian volunteers and the Australian government programs, because the assignments are well sourced. There's a lot of support for the volunteers, which is important when you're overseas and particularly away for a long time. But you know, those early volunteer assignments I did definitely sort of gave me a view about where I should go personally with volunteering, and I guess some strong issues about, you know, how to help organisations too. So, thank you.
Awesome, thank you very much, John. And for you, Maddie?
My experience has been quite different from John's. So my assignment, as Miff said, was as an economic policy analyst. So I was working for the Ministry of Infrastructure in Tonga, and prior to that, I'd worked in the public service, in the Victorian public service. So for me, it was really eye-opening to go from understanding how the public service works within Australia to seeing a public service that's really been, it's a kind of Western model of a public service, but in a non-Western country, in Tonga. And so working in a small team that was supposed to have the same kind of functions as you'd see in an Australian public service, but with a tiny fraction of the resources and with not even really a background in those functions. So the team I was in had functions around procurement, legislation, economic policy, corporate planning, communications, and there were about 4 people in the team, and they didn't you don't need a law degree to do legislation, but they didn't necessarily have even their background in how those functions were, how they were going to work those functions. So for me, it was really interesting to work in a public service in a different country, and be able to assist in getting similar kind of outcomes that were required around performance indicators and corporate planning, and even just some writing for government courses, kind of training I developed as well, because while that wasn't part of my initial assignment, I realised when I came in, not only was it a Western style public service that operates in a non-Western country in Tonga, but also the language in which they operate is English. So, and they don't speak English as a first language. Tongans are, Tonga's an amazing country, and, full of very capable people who actually, everyone obviously speaks English because they've got to write English in public service, but they didn't grow up speak English as the first language, the entire public service. So that was my main assignment, and so I was in the capital, Nuku'alofa, and I also, in my spare time, as Miff said, I kind of did some less formal volunteering there in some small community organisations. I love cycling, and they did have a tiny little organisation that ran some cycling programs around Nuku'alofa, so I got involved in that and some other sporting pursuits, and yeah, that was my assignment.
Wonderful, wonderful. And really good for them both to be talking about the emphasis on the strengthening capacity. We weren't there to, save or, try and, take charge. It was about strengthening the capacity that they already have, and also the sustainability, trying to have that model. John did mention about remote volunteering, and we'll have more information, but that was AVP's solution to volunteering or continuing global volunteering, but as a solution from the pandemic, essentially. So thank you, guys. I'll start with you, Maddie. Can you tell us about other volunteer work you have undertaken here in Australia?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I love volunteering. So I would have started volunteering when I was still at high school. I had the opportunity to get some training in community radio. So I worked for, I'm not sure if people are aware, 3CR is Australia's longest standing community broadcasting program. So I volunteered at 3CR during the end of my high school time for about 4 years running a youth program. So I learned lots of great skills volunteering there. I volunteered for other organisations, the Victorian Women's Refugee Coalition, the UN Victoria branch. I can't even remember what they're called, but doing some kind of research stuff there. It's hard to remember now. And then since returning from Tonga, so actually my assignment was 10 years ago now, I've done some different types of volunteering. So I was the team leader for a program that took young people who are experiencing social disadvantage out sailing in Darwin every Sunday. That was wonderful. And then some more kind of ad hoc volunteering. So Darwin has sports games. Well, actually, they seem to be cancelled indefinitely now, but the Arafura Games that gets people from the Asia Pacific region to come in for community games there. So I was the Tonga and the Nauruan liaison person between the Tongan and Nauruan teams who came, and that was great too. So that's some of the volunteering I've done, but yeah.
Excellent. And yourself, John?
Look, I've done a bit of volunteering in Australia. Normally, earlier I've done international type stuff. I originally used to volunteering here when I first started work in the 80s. Straight out of uni, and my supervisor at the time, his wife was the coordinator for Red Cross meals, and one day he said, "We'd like to help us deliver meals, volunteers to deliver meals." I thought this would be a good career move, which I think it was in the end. Good friends for a long time, but it also showed me the value of the work that at that time Red Cross was doing with their. Not even sure how they deliver the meals these days, but it was really us just picking the meals up, sticking them in the back of the car and fiddling around Canberra at lunchtime. And I found what I got from that was real value, because some of the people all the people I met were incredibly interested, always looking for a chat. So 1 hour lunch, 2 hours and what. I probably didn't appreciate at the time that those chats were probably more important than the meals for a lot of those. It led me to think, through my volunteer journey, that it's not obvious. It's not obvious. Sometimes not the obvious that you're there for. I've also done like everyone here probably has, sausage sizzles and stuff with the kids and volunteering. I do think that's all valuable, because it's all about getting money for the parents associations. Through my international volunteering, especially over COVID, I got involved here in Australia, a couple of assignments with Australian Business Volunteers. They worked with National Bank after the last big bushfires. So Bega Valley here, anyone from New South Wales would know around the Bega Valley. They set up some projects there and looked for volunteers to go down and help. And I had an interest in Bega because I was born, and I never went back, of course. I was born there. And look, the assignment down there was great. You know, I was working with a firm. They were a business. They were looking to keep employment in the Bega Valley. It made them think when bushfires and what have you, were there other models that they could use? And through the process, it turned out the model of bringing people to the Bega Valley for this company anyway didn't quite work, but the company is doing really well now. It's really picked up its business, which has enabled them to employ either nomads who travel around and are looking for IT work, or other people who have decided to move into regional areas. You know, it's worked quite well, but I also do, at the moment, do some volunteering for a group called SECNA, which is Social Enterprise Council of New South Wales and the ACT. It's a peak body for social enterprises in New South Wales and the ACT. There's one of these peak bodies in every state and territory at the moment, and then there's an overarching Australian social enterprise. So the push of those councils is about not only about the social enterprises that are already there, but trying to encourage government and other investors really to take note of these social businesses, start putting some money and making opportunities. And so, and the volunteering I do around that is just going on working groups, doing engagement around the ACT to try and attract more businesses and what have you. Yeah, so that's about it.
Great. I learnt a lot too. I didn't know that. And it's varied from radio to bicycling to community service to social enterprise. That's awesome. I have not done any sausage sizzle because I'm vegan. So I'm off that loop. But John, back to you actually, because you've spoken about undertaking remote assignments and you're currently doing one at the moment. It would be great to hear more about this experience. So could you please briefly describe the challenges and benefits around what you've experienced undertaking this remote assignment?
I do have a tip about sausage sizzle. Change hands. I found you get RSI. Insurance. Yeah, look, as Leela said, because of COVID, you know, in-country assignments just stopped. AVI and Department of Foreign Affairs got together and worked out a good structure around remote assignments. I think they're great. I think a lot of people who go on doing country assignments, like overseas, don't like them too much because you don't get the in-country aspect of it. You know, you're not in there. But most people, or most volunteers I know, see the benefit of it because it doesn't mean you can keep going. There is challenges around, you know, I find personally that it's like working here in, you know, Australia or wherever you come from. You know, building up a working relationship with people in the office is very important. You know, I'd like to think that it's easy on Zoom. It's definitely easier than other modes of things before Zoom, but I find it's more challenging to get connection into the organisation. You've got to work a lot harder at it. You've got to, you know, come up with strategies with the organisation about how you can keep contact. It's very easy. I've found over the years, I don't know if Patty had the experience, but some assignments I did, it's very, sometimes it's a cultural issue, like in Cambodia, where people just disappear. You know, you're working with someone, but all of a sudden your boss and all the staff aren't there anymore. They've gone and done something, but you're not. You know, you haven't been involved in it or something. But that's easier to do when you're not there and you're on Zoom. You know, because you know, I have found that some assignments, unless you're really working at that relationship, can't keep hold of where the people are. And so if they're not engaged, then you're not working from. It's also about, you know, trying to, if you're on, you know, again, it's the same here. If you work, you're working in an office, you know, the internal politics is always there. You know, you get a bit more feel for it if you're there. All that story about the water cooler talks and all that. But if you're on Zoom all the time, that doesn't, you know, that's just not there. So I still think there's the benefits outweigh it. It's probably, personally, I feel that remote are more, assignments are more attuned to a specific purpose, you know, like if you want to, you know, develop strategy or something, that's probably a task type thing. But if you're trying to build an ongoing relationship, you know, with the organisation, I'd say that's a bit harder. It's also good, I think, to enable people who want to dip their toe in the water with volunteering, because it's not as, you know, it still takes a lot of your time, but you don't have to do it, you know, during the day sort of thing. You know, you can do it, you can work that out with the organisation. So I think it's, I personally think that's one of the benefits. You know, that's how I started volunteering. UN Online volunteers, which is still around. That was my first attempt at volunteering, where you could go on, find an organisation, do an assignment, but it was very task orientated. You know, like we need a press release about this or something else. But it starts to give you the feel for the volunteering too. So, you know, I recommend remote volunteering. It shouldn't be dismissed, I guess. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, sorry, that was it. That was the end.
Great segue. You know, thank you, John. Much appreciated. And I think just doing these sessions over the last couple of days, understanding that the motivator, still the highest driver of all motivation is about the social connections. So even though online's a little bit different to in country, it's still providing a lot of benefits around the flexibility. And also, if you jump on the website, there's a lot of remote assignments that is available. And I know and can guarantee that, you know, these kinds of assignments actually can be incorporated with your full-time or caring duties. So it's not like taking away like a lot of time. But yeah, if that's something to start the ball rolling, if you have that interest, definitely there's a capacity to do so. So to you, Maddie, has your, and it's a good, yeah, sort of segue into motivations, has your motivations to volunteer varied throughout your volunteer journey?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've been participating in the sessions over the last couple of days, and I've heard that my experience kind of mirrors that of the research. So when I started volunteering, I was younger and I was looking for, I mean, I'm still young-ish, but I was much younger. But I was looking for roles that it would help me to develop skills that I'd need professionally. And yeah, that would just help develop my attractiveness for the workforce. So I guess I learned, it was a great opportunity to learn kind of practical skills around radio presentation, around interviewing skills, around paneling. I mean, not that I ever went on to do anything to do with media, but I've used those skills since in other organisations. So I've worked for the Alcohol and Drug Foundation and being interviewed on radio and stuff. I'm familiar with that space because I spent 4 years doing it myself in the worst time slots. They gave us the 3 a.m. time slot. And so, yeah, and then so when I was younger, kind of trying to look for assignments, such as that, or other ones where in industries that I might like to work in, that I was interested in community. I've always been interested in community development, so kind of grant writing type roles or research type positions with the UN associations. But since coming back from assignment, it was kind of a bit of a flip. So I was more established in my career. So when I went over to Tonga, I was probably 4 or 5 years into my career as a public servant, and I came back and and it was a bit different. I was looking for something a bit different. So I worked for community organisations, but the volunteer experience and my reason for volunteering was more around that more tangible kind of enjoyment in the moment, and more about community connection and learning skills that weren't necessarily going to help me with my career, but were useful skills to help from a personal perspective. So that's why, I came to Darwin. I was new to Darwin. I got introduced. I'd never done sailing before, and I found this program that took young people out sailing, and it was a great opportunity for me because every Sunday I got to learn how to sail as well as spend time with these amazing young people and give them an experience that was, very valuable to them, but also very valuable to me. And so in creating those new connections with my community. So yeah, my motivation kind of changed from one where I wanted to be in roles that could further my professional skills to connecting more strongly with my community.
That's a fantastic response. For you, John, your motivations, and you've, obviously had a quite extensive volunteering experience. How have your motivations changed throughout the journey?
Thanks. I'm not sure they have changed too much. I think I'm never sure my motivation was to start off. It was just something I wanted to do. I wanted to helpful. Couldn't like the young Maddie here. Couldn't do it when I was young. Because of family and commitments and what have you. And career. I decided to wait till the end of my career and then try and volunteer. I had an interest in Southeast Asia. I was over there in mid-1970s. I just missed out on description. It was always a bit of a mystery, the place to me. When I went there, I a great place and place back to. And felt as I reached retirement, first time I thought, this is an opportunity. I had part of my family to get involved in it. I wanted to be helpful. I think my expectations about what you can achieve and what you do achieve changed. But really, my motivation is still there. I say I've learned to temper expectations, but try and keep the enthusiasm.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, John. Okay, let's go to, actually, this question is good about the sustainability. And it's back to you, John, again. How have you maintained connections with your host country, the organisation you worked with, following your assignment? And how have your ongoing connections with those partner organisation, helped to achieve those sustainable outcomes?
The method ABI I've adopted is a good way to volunteer, particularly internationally and organise. Particularly internationally, where it's the ABI's approach to volunteering now is a journey, that organisation, the host organisation. The first assignments I did were, 15 odd years ago, were peppered with going into an organisation finding out there'd been 4 volunteers before you who did the same thing, but you couldn't find anything. You know, there was no artefacts, no history maintained. It was more about, particularly with the bigger well-funded organisations, it was more about getting volunteers. You know, it was a volunteer program, let's get volunteers. So I constantly ran into you know, this situation where there was no real regard to the ongoing journey of the organisation. Places, things like AVI, their approach has definitely changed that in my mind for the organisations I deal with. It's also made it easier, I think, to build some relationships with the organisations you go to. I think all the assignments I've done, I think probably I'm still in, you know, email contact with all of them. Someone that's had an organisation. Some of them a lot more than others, obviously. And, you know, particularly after you come off an assignment, I find that you're probably going to be in contact more with the organisation. They might still have questions or, you know, direction they might be looking for. But as they grow, which is the whole idea of it, the organisation, you find that the call on your time as the advisors probably gets less, but the friendships that you've developed over there, those relationships are still there. I think you know, it's one of the things that I find most rewarding about volunteering is that you're able to establish those, and people will call on you, you know, years later for a bit of advice or how you're going.
Fantastic, sustainable relationships as well. How about for you, Maddie?
Again, my experience is a bit different because I worked for government. So, you know, I mean, a government organisation is not really going to hit up someone externally for some expertise in an ongoing sense. So, because I work for a government organisation, once I finished my role, that really stayed there. But I maintained strong connections with the people I worked with. So Nuku'alofa, I mean, Tonga's a very small city. Nuku'alofa is a small capital city, and Tonga's a small country. Nuku'alofa is a small capital city. Even, you know, the people that I worked with, I knew their siblings. When I went on afterwards, I got a short-term role with the Australian Sports Commission, working on their international program at the time, and so I went back to Tonga a number of times to work on the Sport for Development program, and that was I was working with a colleague's sister who I already knew very well, so I was already could that relationship building aspect when I went on to this new role was already there. Everyone already knew me. They already trusted me. They were willing to engage with me in a trusted way. And they understood that there was already a respectful relationship there. And I've maintained personal relationships that I made in Tonga over my time in back in Australia with Tongans, and I still in Darwin. As I said, with the Arafura Games, I was the Tongan liaison officer, so I know some of the Tongan community in Darwin. A good friend of mine who I met who was also a volunteer, she came and lived in the suburb next to me. I mean, her husband's Tongan, her kids are half Tongan. So for me, it was not so much about maintaining a kind of professional relationship, but my personal relationships are still strong. It's 10 years on.
And I can attest to that as well. It's like you build those strong connections and you also get to gain another family in some situations. So fantastic. Thank you both for sharing that. Personal benefits. Let's have a look at that. What have you gained from volunteering in Australia, but also volunteering in Australia and also overseas? John.
Look, I guess personal benefits are really a sense of satisfaction. Like, I guess any job you do and you think you do it well, then you're going to get that personal satisfaction. I've always looked at the volunteering as particularly as I've gotten older. As I gotten older, it's become a way of keeping abreast of things I was interested in terms of business and organisation. Every assignment I do, I have to brush up on what the current trends are and the thinking is and that. So it keeps me fresh like that. I find that as a personal benefit. And I think that's really it. I think I just enjoy doing it. I like all the things we've talked about that come out of volunteering. Does help me maintain an updated thing about my skills. I don't think you ever stop learning. Yeah, that's it.
Lovely. Never stop learning. Yep, attest to that as well. For you, Maddie, what personal benefits have you gained from both internationally and local volunteering?
Yeah, sure. I mean, international volunteer program is unique to be able to spend an entire year immersed in a different culture. So that benefit of getting to understand a different culture through language and through those relationships, and after being there for it, just rather than visiting a country, like spending a year in a country, working, having all your colleagues be from that country, and feel like they're on a slightly more equal footing than in the scenario. So in the Tonga government as well, I saw lots of professional consultants, and my experience of that was that they didn't have the same experience as I did. So I could see that people didn't come round to their house and bring them food. People didn't invite them to things in the same way that they invited me to things, because they knew that they were making a lot more money than they were. So while the Australian Volunteer Program gives you a stipend, so you can live in the country for a year. So you were getting some money, and actually the amount of money you were getting was approximately equivalent to the amount that people were getting paid in Tonga, so as at a kind of middle management level. So they know how much people are getting, so they know that the consultant's getting paid this much, and it really changes that dynamic. So I think that cultural immersion that you get from volunteering through a program like the Australian Volunteer Program is special, and learning language, learning about culture. And I think that those same benefits are similar in Australia in terms of connecting to community. Obviously, if you're Australian, you're working in your own community, you understand your own community better and your own culture, like you've lived it better than a foreign culture. But you still don't know everything about your community. So it's also that way to kind of just understand your own community a bit more, develop those relationships a bit more in Australia as well. So it's similar, probably, you could say less exciting, less unknown, but in a way more like there's, a bit more sustainable in a way that you're always going to be there. That, yeah.
Appreciation as well, gratefulness. Okay, next question. Leela. I will ask myself my question. How did volunteering internationally influence your views on local volunteering? I think I'm asked, we discussed me, I guess, answering this because this is quite emotional for me. I was one of the volunteers that got repatriated back into Australia due to COVID. So when that happened, it was like, okay, everyone's back. But I'd been 5 years in Africa before then. So for me, it was like, oh, Australia, this is new. But it actually forced me to reevaluate my values and what I wanted in life. And, I've always wanted to help others, as we all do, and in a sustainable way. But for me, my passion is environmental issues and also animal welfare quite interesting that, you know, the data we've been seeing the last 2 days is about, you know, a lot of interest for non-volunteers who want to enter into that space is environmental issues and animal welfare. And I think we do know that with the current situation. So for me, the values are still there in terms of those two issues, and that's what's driven me to the local volunteering that I do now. So I volunteer with Northern Territory Environmental Centre, land care. You know, we do a lot of weeding and tree planting, and also the local animal shelter. So that's exciting for me in terms of, you know, I guess what that question is and how it's influenced me. How about for yourself, John? If you can give us a brief explanation.
The mic.
My international volunteering has had an impact on local volunteering. I guess I'll be quick on this question because I just think volunteering is a very legitimate way of getting things done. You know, so there's some common grounds and there's uncommon ground in volunteering. So I think sometimes tasks can be done through volunteers very well. Sometimes it may not be the case. So, but I think generally, volunteering is legitimate. I do believe that whether it's locally or internationally, behoves the organisation employing the volunteers to support the volunteers, because I think it is it might on the surface look like a good way of getting the job done cheap, but I do believe that the volunteers keep coming back and be attracted to organisations who, and I'm not talking about payment or anything like that. I just think it's like, you know, you do to others as you'd hope people would do to you if you were a volunteer somewhere. So I do believe the volunteers programs are better when they're well supported by the organisation, and that also includes issues like, you know, the definition of tasks, you know, who people report to. It's not like, to me, and I guess it is, but I'd like not to look at it this way. It's not a hierarchy of staff and the volunteers are down the bottom. You know, so that's just the fact that they are, but they should be treated, you know, get more out of it.
Completely agree. It's also that, again, going back to the strengthening the capacity, working with community and, you know, establishing those deep connections. Excellent. So we're coming to the end. What are your reflections on the impact of your volunteer assignment overseas as compared to the impact that you're having now volunteering in Australia? Would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll be a bit quick. I know it's getting on a bit. Look, I think as I've talked about the journey of volunteer and the journey of the organisation, that's both international and locally, I guess. But often with the assignments I've done, you're the first. You might be the first cog in a whole journey for that organisation. So it's hard to see the impact you might have, because. But I guess my only advice is, if you get into that situation, don't lose heart, because, you know, if you've got the long view of it, it's like any organisation. You don't have, in my mind, you don't have to come away with, you know, we built this or we did that or we did this. You might have done all those things, but the project or the organisation sustainability, you may not see that for a few years or something. So. Don't lose heart. You know, having worked in the government, I was pretty well adapt to this, where, you know, you might work on a policy decision that you might see 10 years later. You know, so if you live for that burst of gratification, you know, after the assignment, you know, never came, you know, for 10 years, you know, so it takes a while. So look, I guess to me it was a good lesson and a good thing to keep in mind. You know, it's hard to use examples, but you know, I did a lot of work in Cambodia, and at the time, the organisation I was working with got some big funding from an American group, and they were going around the province I was working in, putting in water pumps, you know, for good water, clean water, access to water. You know, it ticked all the boxes. 2 years later, I went to the same province, and all the pumps were there and they were all broken. And, you know, the lesson I always got from that, and I think a lot of funders did and everyone else, was it was no use just going into the particularly remote areas and building things that were instant and tick boxes for funders back in America, really, but never gave a lasting sort of result for the people who use them. You know, if you're going to build water pumps, there has to be, someone has to know how to fix them, you know, or where the parts come from, or, you know, and in that province, the whole idea of providing water changed from that. So, you know, a good thing did come from it, but they went more into water filters and stuff like that. There's no movable parts, you know. So, so I just use that as an example. You know, you know, it was great to provide it, but it was more that instantaneous thing. Let's get out there. What can we do? Do water pumps, but there was no long-term benefit to those people.
Thank you, John. Much appreciated. Maddie, your reflections on the impact of your volunteer assignment overseas.
Okay, I know I've got to be brief. So, you know, I won't know really how the Ministry of Infrastructure is going with their corporate planning. I can only, you know that I learnt. There was a lot of great learnings that I got from my colleagues in Tonga, and I know that they valued my contribution too, and I was able to manage to share some of my skills. So really the most ongoing impact of my volunteering assignment was the connections that I made with people. So yeah, and I think we've heard that a lot around through the sessions, that this is what motivates a lot of volunteers, and yeah, those ongoing connections with people.
Very true. AVP, or the Australian Volunteers Programs, really, you know, their big strength as well is touching base with the volunteers, you know, where we go, in the middle, and then also after, so that we can contribute and assist with any changes that need to be made to develop those, you know, strengthen the program that we're implementing. So just throw that in. Also, this is going to be the last question that I ask, and then we can open it up to the audience. So I will ask you, Maddie, and then John, and then open it up. And if you have no questions, I've got 3 that I can show you, but no. Maddie, what was your favourite thing about volunteering, either in Australia or internationally?
Well, I'm not going to say people again because I've already said it. So I can say, like, learning new skills as well, like discovering a country, discovering a culture. In Australia, you know, I learned how to sail through volunteering. I mean, sure, I wasn't getting paid. I was a volunteer, but I didn't pay to learn to sail, you know, like sailing is a pretty exclusive sport. Like, I got to learn to sail. So to get out there and discover more of our beautiful country, that's just another one of my favourite things.
Excellent. And for you, John?
My volunteering is still, you know, the experiences I've gained, the memories I have of where I've worked and the people I've met and the cultures I've been privileged to be a part of, even for a short period. I might just finish with a bit of a story. My last in-country assignment was in Vietnam, in Hanoi, at a group called IC, and they were a young activist group, so they were looking after human rights. So, and look, the office was staffed with, under 30s. They were all under 30s. Got their respect. I was Uncle John. But they were just full of enthusiasm. If you know, Vietnam is still a communist country, and these young people were very adept at looking at all aspects around human rights, gay rights, and very enthusiastic about it. A couple of the young people there, just as I was leaving, had applied for Australian government scholarships to come to Australia to do university, and two of them had were successful. A young guy called Son and one of the girls I was working with, Queen Anne. And I'd been talking up Canberra to Queen Anne and Son, so when they made their choice, they'd come to ANU. Clean air, all these things, beautiful place. Son decided he was going to go to Melbourne because that was the party capital, and he'd heard already that Canberra was boring and didn't come. So he was going off to Melbourne, but Queen Anne liked the idea, and I said to her, look, if you, when you get here, let me know when you're coming, and I'm more than happy, you can stay with myself and my family until you settle in, I thought I said. Told my wife until she settled in. But 2 years later, we were waving Queen Anne goodbye at the airport after living with us for 2 years. But, because what Queen Anne wanted to do was to live with a family and embroil herself into the Australian culture. So luckily, he knew about beer drinking already and things like that. But look, she had a great time. We definitely did. She's our adopted daughter now, and she's back in, she was back in Hanoi long enough to get another scholarship to Belgium for more study. And she's going to go a long way in her career. But I guess it's memories like that I'll treasure, my family will treasure, and to me, make the international volunteering a real thing.
Wonderful. For me, I'm just going to answer people because it is about the people. And I'm also going to tell you that Canberra is not boring. I went out to an underground club on Saturday night and it was really cool. So thank you guys, John and Maddie. Those shared experiences were very inspiring, and we all appreciate your time. And for everyone, thank you so much as well. Does anyone have any questions for John or Maddie?
That's different overseas. Places like Australia. With that different, I find it's easier to with overseas.
I'll just repeat the question for everyone joining us online. The question relates to whether or not Australia is maybe more risk adverse for volunteers, and does that difference, volunteering internationally, open up opportunities more broadly to be able to possibly take on more risks or explore more avenues when volunteering overseas as opposed to in Australia?
Sure, I can answer that. The Australian volunteer program is an Australian program. So for that reason, I think it's very, very similar to volunteering in Australia. In fact, of course, when you're going overseas, there are actually more risks. And so because it's an Australian program, funded by the government, there's lots of like checks that you have to pass to be part of this program, and it's a very, very thorough recruitment process, and you've got to do everything that you would have to do in Australia. That being said, once you're there and you're on your assignment, yes, there's lots of opportunities for more informal volunteering. And I guess I found that it was, I had the formal structure through the Australian, well, it wasn't actually AVI, I went through a different program, a different organisation, but the Australian Volunteer Program. There were opportunities to do that more in less formal volunteering, and most of the volunteering that's done, I can't speak for other countries, but certainly in Tonga, is that informal volunteering. Everyone would be volunteering for their church all the time, doing kind of things that they wouldn't consider volunteering. They're just like, oh yeah, I'm doing church work. Yeah. Well, it's volunteering. Like, they're building tons of stuff. They're like doing things for their community. They're organising the buses for their kids. So it's interesting. It's almost like in Tonga, I found that people had taken on the idea. The word it's a lovely word for volunteering in Tonga. It's nyawa ofa, so the work of love, and so people really appreciate that, and it's all about the love, and they do a lot of it. And that's that definitely doesn't have, everyone does it all the time. There's not really very much structure around it. But then they'd also volunteer. Like, if there was it's almost like the international organisations in Tonga, they wouldn't be considered, if you were with them, you'd be working for them. People would be being paid. Like, and if there were some volunteer roles in, say, a sports program or something, they'd be very formalised. So there's that real differentiation where they might not consider that. That's like, the Western volunteering, as opposed to like the stuff we do for our community constantly.
Yes, up the back. Hi.
Good question for you, Miff.
It is. I will happily take that one and just I'll repeat the question for those online. So the question was asking if the Australian Volunteers Program is the only international volunteering program that is available within Australia. So the answer is no. There are other volunteer sending agencies and organisations that undertake similar programs. I suppose the point of difference with the Australian Volunteers Program is that it is funded by DFAT to support locally led development goals across our partner countries and partner organisations. So very much in line with the strategic objectives and international development policy objectives to work with our partner countries to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's the real, I suppose, point of difference, so to speak, or core focus of the Australian Volunteers Program. Thank you.
Excellent.
I'd just add that this is my personal experience, and I've said it today, that I appreciate the support that places like AVI give volunteers. I've run across a number of organisations overseas that take volunteers, particularly get paid to go and be volunteers, and that's probably a legitimate form. I've met people where I volunteered that have come through those organisations, and they're quite good. But I've also seen the other side of it, where you need to do a lot of due diligence, I think, when you for some of these organisations.
Actually, that's really good. Really good recommendations, because there is a lot out there. It's just having a bit more understanding of the sustainability and the funding and that. Any other questions? Yes.
So just to repeat that question, the question is asking what supports are available to volunteers that are volunteering on the Australian Volunteers Program, and how do those supports maybe differ to what can be offered by other volunteering organisations. And yep, just the final follow on from that, is it best practice? We would certainly say that absolutely it is. As compared to, I will allow John to answer the question, but as compared to your other volunteering experience.
Look, I think it's best practice from what I've seen, and I think that's right. The support that you get as a volunteer, as I get if I go in country, is a full briefing, you know, week-long briefing about the country, where you're going, there's usually an in-country office. So if you go to Cambodia, there's an in-country people in an office. So if you have problems with either your assignment or personally or what have you, there's that support there. There's also, you know, insurances that's covered. There's medical coverage there too. Look, it's just that support in itself. When you, as Maddie mentioned, you know, if you're in a foreign country for a year out in the province somewhere, you can go through a lot of things, and you can fall over, hurt yourself, you can just toothache, you know. I've always felt a lot more comfortable knowing, I've never used it, but I'm always more comfortable knowing it's there if I did. And more so just that fact that you've got people to talk to if something goes wrong. You know, they have a 24/7, no matter what country you're in. If something happens, you're in number and someone there. You know.
And I just wanted to add on that, because I was repatriated. That was a big job for the program, but the support we got from when we were told it's happening to even, you know, even months after, even to now, amazing, you know, support network. So, you know, attest to that for sure.
Yeah, I'll just give you an example. One of my first assignments, not with AVI, other government organisation, was go to Kampong Speu, which is a province pretty close to Phnom Penh. And the instructions I got, you know, no one at the airport, find somewhere to stay, and hop on a bus. The instructions I got was, you'll come to a sign that says Kampong Speu, and there's a big tower there, a radio tower, and tell the bus driver to stop. You know, so and that's all right, but no English on the bus. The bus driver didn't speak English. And I can tell you the tower went past me before I just get off my seat. And then, you know, so I was not where I was supposed to be. I was further up the road by the time he dropped me off with a big bag. And then, you know, trying to find some with a local phone who could speak English, because I had a phone number. Sort of got my stress levels up incredibly, you know, but eventually it all worked out. But it's a fairly simple of example that would never happen with a well-supported, you know, organisation for their volunteers. And, you know, luckily it did work out. It could have ended up anyway.
And again, around, you know, those management or improving the management plans, they're always asking us, giving us surveys, having discussions around what's best practice. We've lived the experience. What do we need, or what was good, or what could be improved? So yeah, I think that's good to go. Thank you.
That has been fantastic. Thanks, Leela. So I would just like to say a really big thank you on behalf of the Australian Volunteers Program to our brilliant panellists today. If everyone could please join me in a round of applause for Leela, Maddie and John.